What if your kid is not an extrovert who is going to connect people, draw people in, start a club, etc.? Most of your examples are kids like that. My son is super passionate about herpetology, pretty niche biology focus. It's 100% authentic, and he has solo projects like breeding dart frogs and internships, local nature center intern and field research volunteer, but he won't be energizing 100 people to join him. I love this question, and I want to step into it on today's podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Admittedly podcast. My name is Thomas Caleel. I'm the former director of MBA admissions and financial aid for my alma mater, the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. In this podcast, I don't promise easy answers or quick fixes, but I will use my decades of experience to help you achieve your education goals. Now let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Admittedly podcast. Today we're going to talk about activities, but from a slightly different angle. I hear this comment a lot. I get it in my DMs, I get it in the comments, and one of our followers recently summed it up quite nicely. So I want to read their comment. And they said, what if your kid is not an extrovert who is going to connect people, draw people in, start a club, etc.? Most of your examples are kids like that. My son is super passionate about herpetology, pretty niche biology focus. It's 100% authentic, and he has solo projects like breeding dart frogs and internships, local nature center intern and field research volunteer, but he won't be energizing 100 people to join him. I love this question, and I want to step into it on today's podcast. So basically, yes, I talk a lot about students who get involved, they lead clubs, they organize things, and they're super involved in their community. But what if you are not that person? What if you're more introverted and you're focused on things that are very, very dear to you, but in a way that is unique to yourself? And I think this is a really, really important question. So how do we address it? Okay, first of all, you don't need to be an extrovert to be successful either in life or in the college admissions process. However, there is a balance here that we need to dig into a little bit. When you go to university, you are not just existing there on your own. You're going to class, you're working on group projects, there's a lot of activities, things to do. And so admissions officers are looking at you and saying, okay, will you integrate into the community? It's fit, and fit goes both ways, right? Do you see yourself being successful at this university? And does the university see you as being a valued member of this community and contributing while you learn? So I think the important thing here is if you are not naturally an extrovert and you do want to focus on more solo pursuits, that's fine, but you can't just exist in your own bubble. And if you look at this particular comment, for example, they say he's doing solo projects, yes, but he has internships. He's a local nature center intern and a field research volunteer. And that's really important. Why? Because he's geeking out, right? And I use that in the best possible sense, geeking out on this love of herpetology, and he's doing it in a way that he can share it with other people and learn from other people. So he's volunteering, he's getting involved. He could have gone and volunteered at the local zoo. He could be doing research with a professor. Any of these things help him get to where he's going. What he's doing right now is fantastic. I wouldn't change a thing. You definitely don't need to change yourself and who you are for this process. So if you are an extrovert, fantastic. If you are the soccer team captain, if you're cheer captain, if you're the lead in the play or the musical, you're the editor of the paper, good for you. That's fantastic. That's who you are, and that's what you're bringing. But I know there are a lot of students who come to us who say, that's not me, and I'm interested in more solo pursuits. So pursue those solo things authentically and well, for sure. But you really want to find ways, okay, how do I evidence this outside of just my personal universe? How do I get out, interact with other people? Because interacting with other people in your chosen field is great training for university, right? Because why? You're bringing ideas, you're being challenged on those ideas, you're learning new things, and how you do that over time is very indicative of how you are going to succeed or not in a university setting. So all of this is great. I want to give you two examples of students I've had who've been very, very successful, but have taken this more, I hate to use the word introverted, extroverted, but more deeply personal journey. First student was one coming to me from the Bay Area, hyper competitive high school. And the mom came to me. She was very upset. She said, the other moms I talked to, they're like, your son is not out doing all these clubs, all this leadership. He's not going to a good school. And this was a very emotional conversation. She was very upset. She was crying. Have I failed my child? I've tried to push him, but I think I've failed them. And so I spent some time talking to this student, and I was like, this is a deeply thoughtful person who's doing really, really interesting things. What was he doing? Well, first of all, he had developed a love of sailing. He was a sailor, and he sailed competitively, but that is kind of a team sport. There's another person in the boat, and certainly you're racing as part of a team, but it's a very individual sport. It's you alone against the wind, or you and your boat mate, your sailing mate, in this small boat with a sail, and you're trying to win in very difficult conditions week in, week out. And so there was that. This student was a gifted artist. He was a painter, was mostly his medium. He did some other things, but he did spend a lot of time in the studio just by himself painting. He interacted with a lot of teachers. He interacted with some mentors and showed his work in galleries and things around town. But it certainly is not a pursuit that is like a team pursuit. He wasn't leading 100 students in this activity. The third activity that he did was research, and he had been picked up, he'd been identified and kind of picked up by a lab manager at one of the labs on Stanford campus because of some writing he had done, because of some conversations he'd had with part of the team, and he was invited to join the team in a very limited capacity at first. And he would go, he'd show up, put his head down, he'd work really, really hard. He'd sit in on the meetings with the other grad students. He was not a grad student, obviously, and learn from that, and slowly began to contribute and find his voice. But he wasn't trying, he wasn't saying he was a leader of this team. He wasn't saying he made huge advances, but he was a really important and valued member of this team. What did he learn? He learned research methodology. He learned the discipline it takes. He learned about long, hard hours in the research lab after school, where he really could just kind of put his headphones on and work and get immersed in that work and really lean into it. And so as we approached universities, I said, we want to acknowledge this. We want to show that this is his strength. It's his superpower. It's his ability to focus and work with, 1-2 people or small groups and excel and thrive in that environment and be comfortable with that. And it was matched by good grades in school. So obviously he was doing his work in school. He was contributing in the classroom, but he wasn't involved in 10 things in school and clubs and everything else. And this is a great example of what I mean when I talk about doing less, but doing it intentionally. He had a very full schedule, but every minute of his time was something that he loved doing. He would finish school and either go to sailing practice or, jump on his bike, race over to the lab, and get started on his research. He'd spend his free time painting. It was what he said gave him his kind of meditative release and his way to kind of center himself after a rough day. And so telling that story and telling it effectively, I believe, is one of the most important reasons he was accepted REA to Stanford, because they recognized, hey, this is somebody unique. This is somebody who's doing things his own way. This is somebody who's comfortable in that silence, in that space, in his own mind. He's comfortable there, but he's also very comfortable interacting with people, just not on this broad spectrum that people define as leadership in university. Let me give you another really great example. This next student was also an artist, and they were interested in insects. And I know, it sounds like our herpetologist here, but they were interested in conservation and insects. And they were doing a project, a nature conservation project outside their city, where they were going up into the hills and looking at the impact of industrialization and air pollution on insect populations. And so cataloging, and this is deeply introspective, deeply kind of personal work, where you're just sitting there with a camera, with a notepad, making notes, making observations, tracking things over time. They weren't marching up the hill with 50 volunteers in tow. They were part of a broader study, but they were not a leader in any sense in this. And so they were perfectly happy sitting there for the weekend, cataloging insects, counting things, taking notes. And that was their really kind of happy, centered place. And what they did was they said, okay, how do I intersect my love of art? And this was just a very gifted artist. I still have a gift that they gave me, which was a hand-done pop-up book that they had engineered and designed and cut everything by hand and gave to me as a gift for my children who were young at the time. It's a very, very treasured gift that I still have. And what this student did was they said, okay, I want to show the impact of environment on insect populations. And the way they did this was they had these little squares, these little paper squares, and they did these hand drawings of the life cycle of this insect. But instead of just doing one life cycle, they made it as almost like a choose your own adventure book. So it started on one side. It was an exhibit that eventually ended up covering like 2 walls of a gallery. You started with this egg of this praying mantis, and you followed its journey, and you had to make decisions of air pollution, water pollution, development, loss of habitat, loss of natural predators, increase in natural predators, all of these things. And you could trace the lifestyle of this insect over these hundreds of hand-drawn little drawings, almost like cells in an animated feature. And it was this beautiful, brilliant, poignant way for them to intersect these 2 deep passions that they have and share it with other people. And so this was not something where they started the conservation club or the insect preservation club. This was hours and hours of work, just backbreaking work in the studio, drawing fine details and thinking about how this story plays out over hundreds of small drawings. So what I wanted, and eventually very successful, ended up at Brown, which was their top choice, and just thrived there. So what I really want to get to here is something I get to often: doing less, doing it intentionally, and doing it in a way that serves yourself. For any of you who are on our socials at Admittedly Co. on TikTok and Instagram, I get a lot of incoming just attacks, very, very aggressive, angry attacks with parents saying, oh, I'm responsible for ruining the youth, let them be kids. And my approach here is a little bit different. I think, yes, you're right. You shouldn't be just frantically racing from activity to activity to activity, doing things as quickly as possible and as much as possible to try and build out a resume. I think you need to be true to yourself. You need to understand, okay, what feeds me? What depletes me? And how can I find a way to express my interests in that particular modality? If you're an extrovert, go for it. If you're an introvert, lean into that, right? But being an introvert is not an excuse to not do anything and sit in your room and write code or play video games or just hide from the world. And I really want to stress that, right? In all of these examples, in the herpetologist, in the insect student, in the sailing research student, all of these students got out and they were active in things in a way that served their more introverted nature, but they did it. They were interacting with other people. They were putting themselves out there. They were involved with activities that did allow them to grow and develop in their particular area of interest. So I hope the takeaway from this is that you can be true to yourself. You can do the things you want to do them intentionally, and do them well. I have a lot more to say on this as we head into a new admission season. So please be sure to follow along at Admittedly Co. on Instagram and TikTok. Be sure to attend our free monthly webinars. And thank you very much for following the podcast. Thank you for joining us today. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Admittedly podcast and download this episode. I welcome you to share your thoughts and questions with me. You can find us on social media at Admittedly Podcast. I look forward to continuing our journey together.